Hello, I'm Dr. Winston York. I'm a software engineer, but I'm also very interested in voting and voting systems. This fall, my province of British Columbia is holding a referendum on whether or not to adopt proportional representation as our voting system in the place of first past the post. I'm making this series of videos to help voters, particularly conservative voters like myself, make an informed decision about how to vote in this important referendum. An important way in which proportional representation would differ from first past the post is the diversity of the legislature. First past the post tends to encourage more moderate political parties. The parties are always trying to win the center's vote because they need the centrists to vote for them in order to win the election. As a consequence, you'll see that all parties aren't left-wing or right-wing parties, they're center-right or center-left parties. Meanwhile, they try to paint their political opponents as dangerous extremists, regardless of whether or not that's actually true. And the consequence is that we have parties in the legislature who are more or less pretty close to the center most of the time. This isn't what happens under proportional representation. Without the concern for vote splitting, there are parties trying to appeal to different portions of the political spectrum. And so you get a much wider diversity of political traditions and ideas being represented in the legislature in a proportional system. Now, if you belong to a political tradition you think is underrepresented in the legislature, this is probably good news because you think you could actually vote for a party that stands for the things you stand for. Maybe they wouldn't be able to get those into law, but that they could at least say them and put them out on the political stage. But keep in mind that while it may allow your political perspective to get into the legislature and into the political debate, it also allows political perspectives entirely opposite to your own to have their own voice as well. A big concern here is that really extreme parties might actually be able to get elected. Fringe parties, they're often called. And indeed, in some systems, such as Germany, we actually see this happening. Right now in Germany, there's a party called the Left, and it's a successor to the East German Communist Party. And there's another party called the Alternative for Germany, which is accused of being a fascist party. As an outsider, it's difficult to tell whether they're actually fascists or if that's just political name-calling. Whatever the case may be, the other parties in the German political spectrum consider them extreme and won't work with them. They don't bring them into coalitions, and this has sometimes made it somewhat more difficult to form coalition governments, but Germany still manages to do it. So a big argument made against proportional representation is we don't want these extreme parties to be represented. That's really bad. I should note, however, there's a limitation. There's typically a threshold, a percentage of the vote a party has to get in order to qualify for seats. And it's typically 5%, and the indication we've gotten from the NDP is that that would probably be the threshold here in British Columbia. The consequence is that really small parties, parties that would get less than 5% of the vote, can't get into the legislature. So it's not as though we have every tiny party able to get into the legislature. They do have to get a notable amount of the vote before they can qualify for seats. Nevertheless, it's quite possible that there will be parties in the legislature who we consider extreme and wish weren't there. But as I pointed out, all political parties are coalition. The people who vote for these other parties are already within your coalition, already influencing your parties. All that proportional representation is doing by allowing them to have their own party is making it more transparent. We're showing you what's already going on. Now, these really extreme parties typically don't actually have that much influence because they're deliberately excluded from the political process. So they're not that much of a concern. So under proportional representation, the legislature would actually resemble the province. It would actually be a reflection of the different ideologies in the province. Under first past the post, the legislature isn't really a reflection of the province as a whole. It's a reflection of the coalitions in the center. In my view, it's a really dangerous idea that we would actually want to exclude certain people from political representation or putting their voices out there in the political process on the basis of the fact we don't like what they think. I don't like what lots of people think, but really I think it's important that they are allowed to say it. So the questions you have to think about is getting a political perspective into the legislature more similar to mine worth the risk of having an opposite view being put into the legislature as well? Should we try and restrict views which we consider extreme from being able to get part of the political process? I think we shouldn't. I think that we should actually allow the legislature to reflect the population as a whole, warts, weirdnesses, and all.